folk bare trenger det virkeligheten. Vi hører hva han sier.
Hey everybody, Economic Ninja here. I hope you're doing great. I cannot get over how big this crisis is in the banking sector. And what blows my mind is how few people understand. I talk to people all the time and say, do you realize right now the banking sector is imploding and it's worse than 2008? And they just look at you like you're nuts, or why are you telling them this? You know, in 2006, when I started to run for the hills, selling my real estate and literally telling everyone to get out of real estate because the market is collapsing, they laughed at me. 2.5 years ago, I started this YouTube channel to warn people about the greatest collapse in our lifetime that was already starting then. And what's sad is they have no clue how long a collapse takes. Now, let me explain something to you. We've just seen 3 banks crash, right? We've seen Signature Bank, Silicon Valley Bank, and First Republic Bank. Now, I'm going to show you a chart, and it may be backwards. But check this out. This is 2008 right here. All of the banks combined crashing. They all came to a valuation of a little over $500 billion that were lost, right? That's the valuation of those banks, and they were wiped out, okay? That's 2008, all of it combined. It was Washington Mutual Bank, which came to $432 billion. And then you had 24 other banks that equated to about $94 billion. So again, let me show you this. 2007 all the way up, right? Look at all those banks totaling a little over $500 billion. So now this is where we're at right now. In the last, about let's say 7 weeks, we have seen 3 banks go down. 3, all right? This is where we're at right there. 3 banks, First Republic, Silicon Valley, and Signature Bank. As of right now, we are literally sitting at First Republic lost $213 billion, Silicon Valley Bank $209 billion, and Signature Bank $110 billion. We are right now in just 3 banks in 7 weeks, the same size of all of the bank failures in 2008. Now, this is what people do not understand and how big of a deal it's going to be. It just didn't happen in 2008. As a matter of fact, if you see in 2007 on this chart, there's just a little bit of bank loss, right? Nothing really to be even talked about. Nothing, just a couple of small banks. But what happened is it carried on. Even after the Federal Reserve stepped in and started to bail everything out, we saw bank failures in 2009, 2010, 2011, right? Equaling a lot of loss. But we're not even halfway through 2023 right now. And we are already at the entire amount lost in 2008. And in 2008, everybody's lives changed. Even if you were out of debt, borrowing costs got more expensive fuel, there was all kinds of things that affected us, right? Businesses were closing down. People were literally losing their livelihoods. And ironically, everybody's forgot. And now we are in the middle of a crash that is so much bigger, has so much more of a magnitude behind it. It is literally like a freight train that can't be stopped. And I've been warning people that by this fall, you're going to see things absolutely crumble. And one thing that we have today that is so much worse than 2008 is commercial mortgage-backed securities. I've been warning about this for literally 2 years. Commercial mortgage-backed securities are literally just like what took down 2008, which were mortgage-backed securities, but on a much, much grander scale. You see, commercial mortgage-backed securities are tied to multifamily real estate. Think of those big, 100, 500 apartment complexes, the local strip malls, the Walmart centers. Think commercial, big buildings full of IBM employees, Google employees, Amazon employees. But what's bad about that? That's right, mass layoffs. Right now, we're seeing literally thousands and thousands of jobs being lost since December. But on top of that, one thing that we've never seen, literally in 100 years, are companies that told their employees they were allowed to go home and work from home. And after an extended period of time, a lot of those employees, they said, we really don't need a building for these employees. So why are we burdened with all of the cost of maintaining a building, paying the electricity, even filling up the water cooler for them to have a nice cold drink of water and gossip around there? Why not just stop paying on those? Right now, there are more companies deciding to get rid of their commercial real estate and literally hand the keys back to the landlord than ever before. And it is getting so big and so bad, it is actually what is causing these bank collapses. As a matter of fact, you can see in the news all over the place that these banks are crashing because of the commercial mortgage-backed paper. And the reason why you know this is because it is the one asset class, as Silicon Valley Bank was split apart, and you'll pretty soon see it in First Republic Bank, that they never, ever had a chance, because that is the one asset class none of the banks want. They'll buy up all.
Jeg vil bare skyte inn en ting her, det som han ikke sier her, det er at folk skal ha vært vant med hjemmekontorene, covid-19. Og det som folk ikke tenker på dette med AI, kunstig intelligens, det kommer til å ta arbeid fra folk. Ikke nå, tar de tappevis. Nå får de først hjemmekontor, for de er ikke brukferdig, og så er dette AI overtaget. Så om en liten stund, så har de ikke arbeid. Det er fakta. Så dette er nøye. Det er en oppskrift på dette her som de fører. Men folk har ikke opptatt dette heller lenger. Så det er mange som kommer til å miste jobben, dessverre. Så, men dette med hjemmekontor, det er bare en måte liksom å ta det trinnvis. Ikke folk skal bli, ja. Nå sparer første bedriften mye penger på ikke å kjøre ned. Trenger ikke leie kontorplass og sånne ting. Og så får dette AI, og så får de sparken opp, fordi de ikke bruker for det. Og det er mange ting som gjør det, altså ikke bare AI, men det blir dårligere tider, og mer som går konkurs, og de må spare kostnader. Men da er de jo allerede hjemme, de er jo vant med hjemmekontor, så det blir knalltøffe tid med å gå i møte.
All the other assets for pennies on the dollar, like JP Morgan, benefiting from this. And they want these assets, the good assets, to help offset their bad assets, because as big and awesome as you think these big banks like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan, all these banks out there are, they are all tied to this market too, the CMBS market, and it is going down, and it is going down fast. So think about it. As you start to watch more and more banks collide, we're already at 2008 levels, and it is going to get worse. It's all about paying attention to who could see this ahead of time and who has been there before. You've got a lot of talking heads in the media right now, and they've only been in the real estate market literally since 2010. They've only seen prosperity, but prosperity is now over, and the nation is under judgment, financial judgment, and it is coming down like a hammer. It absolutely blows my mind when I was running for the hills in 2006, watching how fast that happened compared to now. This is so much bigger than 2006. It's insane. It's time to protect yourselves. Get out of debt. Stop getting into more debt. Start to save cash aside, getting ready for downturns in the market, these deflationary, just plummeting reverse spikes, being able to take advantage, buying assets, pennies on the dollar. It's one thing to watch the banks make money from this hand over fist. It's another thing for me to be able to watch you make money hand over fist. It's not right that the banks get to buy up all these assets for pennies on the dollar. You should be the one to do it, but you can't do it unless you're ready. Time to get ready. Guys, I hope you got something out of this. The Economic Ninja is out.
Husk også på at oljefondet investerer på børsen og i eiendomsmarkedet borte i Amerika, og under svakere kroner og dollar og alt det som skjer nå. Så dette blir et økonomisk mareritt, men folk har ikke skjønt en meter av det nå i Norge. Så dette blir heavy. Jeg forklarer veldig godt hvor galt dette her er, og da kan folk begynne å stille seg spørsmål. Hvorfor folk ikke nok godt å forberede på dette oljefondet og alt det der rollet. Det er helt utrolig det vi opplever nå. Det er århundres krasj.
Even the mainstream media is talking about how we may see another global financial crisis this year.
It's going to be at least as bad as 0809. People don't want to say that.
But I think they're completely wrong. I don't think we'll have another GFC. Because this time in 2023, unfortunately, I think it may be even worse. I'm going to explain why in 3 simple, fast steps. Step number 1, let's go right over the most powerful economic indicator. And this is per the Federal Reserve. In fact, editor, let's go right to the internet and hear straight from Jerome Powell himself.
So this article goes back to March 21st of 2022. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell on Monday weighed in on a major topic of debate in the bond market. The question, where to look to determine the chances for a U.S. recession. It says some investors have been calling attention to a rapidly shrinking spread between 2-year and 10-year Treasury yields, sounding the alarm, something we've been doing on this channel for the last year. Talk about that inversion. But Powell says, frankly, there's good research by staff in the Federal Reserve System that really says to look at the short first 18 months of the yield curve. That's really what has 100% of the explanatory power of the yield curve. It makes sense, because if it's inverted, that means the Fed is going to cut, which means the economy is weak. Those are Jerome Powell's words, not mine.
So what is this secret indicator the Fed uses that Jerome Powell himself says is so powerful? It would be the near-term forward spread. This is a chart of a 90-day moving average. We go all the way back to 2005. In fact, the original chart, editor, go ahead and throw that up, goes back even further. It goes all the way to today's date. On the left, we go from 0% up to 4%, all the way down to a negative 4%. So anything below 0 would indicate that this curve is inverted. All right, so what metrics are we measuring? Well, it's the expected 3-month Treasury yield looking 18 months out relative to the current 3-month Treasury yield. Let's assume for a moment that the market participants right now are betting that the 3-month Treasury yield is going to be 2% in 18 months. But today, as we speak, the 3-month Treasury yield, let's just say, is yielding 5%. All right, well, that's a 3% delta. What that would tell you is that this near-term forward spread was inverted by 3%, using those numbers as an example. So when we look at this chart, in fact, going all the way back even before 2005, we can see that Jerome Powell is right. This is very powerful in its ability to predict when we will have a recession and if we will have a recession. As an example, we've got this 90-day moving average right before the GFC. It inverted by about 1%. And it went right back up, and then just prior to the cerveza sickness, it inverts again. The problem is today, as you would imagine, it's inverted, but it's inverted even more than it was prior to the GFC. So what that's telling us is market participants are betting their own money that the Fed is going to drop rates even faster than they did during the GFC and even faster than they did prior to the cerveza sickness. Now, if they're dropping rates that fast, they're not going to be doing that because we're having a soft landing. They're going to be doing that because we are in a financial or economic crisis. Another thing I'd like to point out, according to the Fed's own website, the near-term forward spread predicts monetary policy, recessions, in other words, negative GDP, and it predicts stock market crashes. And right now, the Fed's most powerful economic indicator is saying that things are worse today than they were in 2008, leading up to the global financial crisis. Step number 2, real Americans are struggling, and it's only getting worse. So in step number 1, we talked about these esoteric curves and yield curve inversions, near-term forward spreads. It's all this mumbo jumbo. But now let's talk about what it's like for the average Joe and Jane, the real-life impact of a deteriorating economy. We've got this index that goes all the way back to 2021 to May of 2022. So keep in mind, if we had a chart that went all the way to today's date, the numbers would be even worse. And what this is showing us is wages, nominal wages, indicated by this black line, compared to real wages. When you adjust for inflation, on the left, we go from 100 starting point up to 113 down to 97, about 95 or so. And if you just look at nominal wages over the last couple of years, things look pretty good. And this is what the mainstream media likes to focus on, including the central planners at the Federal Reserve. So we've got the average Joe right here, and he has got a big grin on his face because his paycheck has gone way up. But unfortunately, when the average Joe takes his paycheck to the grocery store, that's when he starts to get pissed. That's when Joe turns into Mad Joe. Because once he starts paying for food, shelter, energy, he realizes that his purchasing power has gone down even though his paycheck has gone up. In other words, he's far worse off today financially than he was in 2019. Now, I know a lot of you right now that are really paying attention are saying to yourself, wait a minute, George. I mean, I see these curves you're talking about, and it is true, real wages have gone down, but every single time I go to a restaurant or a movie theater or the bowling alley, it's just absolutely packed. It looks like the economy is booming. And that's a very good observation. I think this is key. But what we have to ask ourselves is who is actually doing the spending at the bowling alleys, the movie theaters, the restaurants. Mostly, it's younger people. Okay, well, let's think this through. A lot of the younger people today, and I'm not going to paint with a broad brush or anything, I'm not going to stereotype, but it is true. A lot of younger people today live at home. It's a lot different than when I was growing up, and your parents would literally kick you out of the house, no matter what, when you turned 18. So if you've got a 25-year-old, a 30-year-old that's still living at home, they really don't have all of these costs that the households have. Are they paying for food? Maybe. Shelter? No. Energy? No. Are they paying for a car? No. They can just go ahead and take Uber. So if their nominal wages have gone up, well, their real wages have likely gone up as well. And let's not forget, they haven't had to make any student loan payments since 2020. That's almost 3 years. So is it any surprise that the restaurants, the movie theaters, and the bowling alleys are packed? Absolutely not. But does that mean the economy is doing well? Absolutely not. Because the majority of the population actually has expenses that have gone up, and therefore their purchasing power has gone down dramatically. Now let's compare this to what happened in 2008. Editor, go ahead and throw up a chart of real wages back then. And we can see that during the GFC and prior to the GFC, although it wasn't a lot, real wages were going up. So let's think about that. Prior to the GFC, we had this buffer of real wages going up. We're now headed into the next crisis, as predicted by the Fed's own yield curve. Real wages are going down, not up. And in my opinion, this is one of the many reasons we could be headed into something that's even worse than what we saw in 2008. Oh, but wait. Unfortunately, there is more. I looked at a chart the other day that completely blew my mind. And for those of you who watch my old videos, I'm going to give you a warning right now. It is officially stiff drink time. So make sure you're sitting down before you look at this chart, because it is sobering, no pun intended, to say the least. Editor, let's go right to the internet.
Let's start by going right to my Twitter feed and something I retweeted yesterday. This is from my good buddy, Macro Alf. You can follow him at Macro Alf on Twitter. 44% of Americans expect to apply for a buy now, pay later loan at least once in the next 6 months. That's roughly 150 million Americans. He goes on to say, what do they need these buy now, pay later loans for? According to a recent Lending Tree survey, 21% of respondents needed a buy now, pay later loan to buy groceries. Wow. Just let that sink in for a moment. And I'd also like to point out exactly what I said in this retweet, that 21% of respondents are borrowing money to buy groceries at, mind you, a 28% interest rate on these buy now, pay later loans. And this is occurring when the unemployment rate in the United States is 3.5%. What happens if we go through a recession and the unemployment rate goes up to 7, 8, maybe 10% or even higher? Just think how many Americans will have to borrow money to buy groceries then. It's going to be like nothing we've ever seen. It's going to make the Great Depression look like a picnic. Now let's go through the actual data in the chart. So of the people that responded, so again, 44% of Americans, that's 150 million people, 46% are taking out this buy now, pay later loan at 28%, mind you. That's the average I got from my research assistant, Josh, to buy clothing, shoes. 34%, home decor, appliances, technology, 27%, beauty, body, and hair care products, 26%. I mean, let that sink in a moment. You've got 150 million people, 26%, let's just say that's 35 million people, are borrowing money to buy shampoo. Meanwhile, all these 25-year-old kids are packing every single restaurant and bar that you drive by. It's this totally bifurcated economy. Then we get down to groceries, like we said, 21%. So that's 35 million Americans right now borrowing money at 28% just to put food on the table. And unfortunately, if the Fed's own powerful economic indicator is right, this is going to get far worse before it gets better. And I can assure you, going into the last GFC, the average Joe and Jane was not struggling to this degree.
Step number 3. Now let's go ahead and look at the banking system. We know the first GFC was a financial crisis, but what's happening today in 2023, maybe even before we get to a recession? Well, let's look at this chart that goes all the way back to 2007 to today's date. On the left, we go from 0 billion up to 600 billion. This is the inflation-adjusted size of the bank failures that we have seen in 2023 compared to what we saw in 2008. So in 2008, at about 500 billion was the assets on the balance sheet of the banks that failed. But what do we see now? And again, these are inflation-adjusted numbers. Today, and we're not even through 2023. In fact, we're only 4 or 5 months in to 2023, and the size of bank failures have exceeded what we saw during the global financial crisis in 2008. But then, of course, the argument that you're going to get from all your friend and family member friends is, yeah, George, okay, but it was all with 3 or 4 banks, and it's contained. It's no big deal. There's no systemic risk like we saw in 2008. So this is all just fear-mongering and tinfoil hat stuff. Okay, well, let's go ahead and think that through. So what does the housing market look like today compared to 2008? Editor, go ahead and throw up a chart of housing prices compared to incomes, and we can see the housing bubble today is even worse than it was back then. Okay, how about the stock market? Editor, you know what to do. Go ahead and throw up the Buffett indicator. We can see once again, today it's worse. And I probably don't even have to mention the problems that we are seeing right now with commercial real estate. The prices in nominal terms have already started to plummet. And I'd like to remind everyone that that is a $20 trillion commercial real estate bubble that is now starting to pop. And it has tremendous systemic risk with today's banking system. And we saw that play out just the other day when First Republic was the last bank to go bust. But what about the consumer? The unemployment rate is very low, 3.5%, like we discussed earlier. So isn't the consumer spending going to go ahead and give the economy the buffer it needs to avoid a recession, economic depression, or something that's even worse than what we saw in 2008? Well, first and foremost, like we said in step number 2, Moody the millennial, or I'll have to think of another character for the Gen Z, but the young people, let's say, with their blue hair, they do not equal the average Joe and Jane. And the average Joe and Jane is far more important to the overall health of the economy than Moody the millennial, regardless of how many pronouns they have. But like I highlighted in that tweet earlier, I would argue the fact that we have a 3.5% unemployment rate is actually a bad thing, not a good thing. Because think about what's happening right now, well, with the banking system, as an example. And we have had more banking collapses this year, or larger banking collapses in aggregate total than we did in 2008. And that's with an extremely low unemployment number. So what happens to the banking system when the unemployment rate goes up even higher? You say, well, George, well, how do you know that's going to happen? Let's go right back to the yield curve, the 2s and 10s, or the near-term forward spread. And what we can see is that when the curve is inverted, that's not usually when the stuff hits the fan. It's when the curve is no longer inverted. And what I mean by that is currently the curve is inverted. So whatever we're seeing throughout the economy right now is just the beginning. It's just the tip of the iceberg. Once that curve starts to uninvert, if that's a word, or once that curve is no longer inverted, that's when we're really going to see the full impact of that economic tsunami that is headed our direction. So if you have a lot of friend and family member Freds that are pointing at the unemployment rate and saying that it's impossible that we go into a recession. I mean, look at what Janet Yellen is saying. She's saying the labor market is extremely tight. This means the economy is on fire. Yada, 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 yada. I would like you to go ahead and give them this chart. Editor, go ahead and throw it up. And we can see that going back to the 1940s, for heaven's sakes, every single time we're at the beginning of a recession, the unemployment rate is very low, just like it is today in 2023. So my base case, the way this plays out, is once that yield curve, for either near-term forward spread, the 2s and 10s, doesn't matter. We'll focus on the 2s and 10s because that's super easy for everyone to follow. Once that 2-year Treasury yield goes back below the 10-year Treasury yield, likely within the next few months after that, you'll start to see the unemployment rate go up. And that's when the cracks in the economic dam get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's when we'll most likely see even more of these bank failures that will turn into a crisis that exceeds what we saw during the GFC and 2008. So the next question becomes, what can you do to protect yourself? How can you make sure that you survive and thrive this economic storm that is likely coming our way? Well, the first thing you can do is make sure you're educated, have an edge. There's no better way to do that than go to Rebel Capitalist Live. This is the conference that I'm holding May 12th through the 14th in Orlando. We've got speakers like Peter Schiff, Mike Maloney, Lynn Alden, Brent Johnson, Jeff Snyder, just to name a few. You're going to be able to meet them face to face, rub elbows, ask them your questions directly, and even more importantly, you can meet, hang out, and network with your fellow rebel capitalists and build that sense of community. And that's how to really be resilient and anti-fragile regardless of what happens in 2023 and into 2024. So you can get your tickets ASAP at rebelcapitalistlive.com. I look forward to seeing you.
Du ser dette med kunnskap, det så viktig, og det det ingen som forstår i Norge. For journalistene kunnskapsløse, politikerne kunnskapsløse, bankfolk kunnskapsløse, for de står med hovene i sanden, og det smitter jo hele befolkningen. Og bare for et eksempel, i dag så kan du lese at 4. mai, at da kommer svakere enn ventet fra Sparebank1 SR-bank. Men de har jo da klart på ett kvartal, så klart å få 1,1 milliard første kvartal opp ifra fjor, for de panikk. De prøver å søtte inn penger, så de kan ha folk, for de vet denne. Egentlig vet de ikke hva som skjer, men de sier det ikke. Og det som litt interessant å se her med SR-bank, det det at altså de har fått 1,1 milliard, litt mer enn de hadde i fjor, på samme tid i fjor. Så har de utlånsveksten på 24,6 milliarder kroner de siste 12 månedene, tilsvarende 10,5% utlån. Personmarkedet vokste med 7%, BM storkunde 18%, og landbruk med 15,2%. Men det forstår de ikke, for de har ekspandert så voldekt. Og så ser du også, det en annen ting også her, netto, skal vi se, en første kvartal 1,4 milliarder, og så var en annen ting jeg så, og konsernet hadde 35 millioner kroner. Ja, der det, ser du. De har allerede begynt å skrive ned tapet. De har begynt å komme med tap. Altså, konsernet hadde 35 millioner kroner i nedskrivninger på utlån og finansielle forpliktelser i første kvartal, sammenlignet med 15 millioner i samme kvartal i fjor. Altså, mer eller dobling med nedskrivning her de nå. Mer eller dobling av dette bare begynnelsen. Husk det har dere sett i filmen her før nå. Så dere må få pengene ut av SR-bank. Så hun her bankdirektøren, hun skal virkelig få røyne seg. Så om SR-bank den første banken som går over enda i Norge, det skal bli veldig interessant å se, men jeg ser ikke vekk ifra at det kan være i hvert fall en kandidat. Så den som går først over, for de har ekspandert så veldig. Jeg har jo lagt en egen film med SR-bank, så skal jeg ikke si så mye her om den. Jeg går ikke den filmen heller. Men dette blir tøft for dem. Det er jeg 100% sikker på. Og det som er interessant å se, det var her i mars, hvordan det gikk for 3 år siden, da covid kom, da det var panikken. Da raste SR-bank, og mange banker, ikke bare de, helt ned den torsdag den 19. mars. Da var det helt ned i 23. mars var det. Og det er jo et svakhetstegn når det er at en bank, altså det er sånn en happening som skjer. Alle banker som mest raste kjelleren da, det sier bare litt hvor svake de er. Altså dette er jo børsen da, altså investorene, hva tror de har på banken, i og med at noen hiver ut aksjene. Så jeg tror vi kommer til å få sånne som dette her øyeblikk, bare dobbelt så høye. Han kommer til å rase. Og det er jo da det er trist å ha penger i denne banken, når at hvis de går konkurs og de må krangle med dette garantifond og alt det der greiene for å få pengene dine. Du kan få ut aksjer. Vi vet ingenting som vet. Men dere har sett filmen her nå. Så han fører her nå, og det er enda verre i Norge eller i Amerika. For vi norske kroner har jo duttet seg i kjelleren, så vi har jo mye høyere prisstigning allerede eller amerikanerne har. Så dette blir knalltøft for mange. Så vil se de taper absolutt alt. Og kun fordi de ikke har kunnskap selv og setter seg inn i dette her. De er borte manipulerte. av hele systemet i Norge, og ikke har kunnskapet selv. Vi lever i den største løgnen i menneskehetens historie. Det det stadig flere og flere som forstår nå. Men dessverre langt ifra alle. Og det viktig å forstå dette budskapet her, Anna. For vi har vært rundlurte. Politikere, bank, altså har vi ledelse av dette. Og politikerne, de bruker jo media som et verktøy for å manipulere og lure deg. Det har de gjort alltid. Det som litt trist, det at utviklingen, den ringe utviklingen nå, den går foran oppvåkningen. Folk har vært så dramatiserte, eller hjernevaste, eller vanskelig å finne ord på det, rundlurte, at de vil ikke tro det. De vil ikke, fordi de vegrer seg for å gå inn i det. Ubehagelig å begynne å rote i sånne ting som du selv ikke oppdager, men så vil du bare la det være, du får ikke sove, og du bare skuler på det. Nei, det går så godt til. Nei, det ikke sant. Og du lager altså unnskyldninger. Det handler om psykologi, dette her. Så folk som tar avstand, altså folk som ikke tør å gå inn i dette her og føle på dette her, de blir rundlurte. Så enkelt det bare. Og det det som jeg har uttrykt at oppvåkningen skulle gått mye kvikkere i Norge, men det gjør det ikke. Og det en sånn likegyldighet som skremmende i Norge. Vi ser jo i utlandet mye mer protester og demonstrasjoner og sånne ting. Men her i Norge ser vi mest ingenting. Men det også har med et lite land, og det lett å kontrollere, som en utkantpost. Og ja, normalt har jo Norge hatt tillit og sånn den norske kulturen, men de siste 25 år etter mer denne globale tankegangen og politikken kom inn, til mer kriminalitet og økonomiske bedrageri og kriminalitet har vært innført i Norge. Dette er politikerne importert også inn fra EU. Og vi hører jo hvor gale dette er i utlandet, alltid går gode med i Norge. Men må huske på det at all denne driten som er i utlandet, den importerer vi også til Norge. Og ikke bare spolle på utlendinger, muslimer, det er feil. Det er ikke de som er utfordringen. Den største utfordringen, det er politikerne, banksystemet, staten. Det er det som er store utfordringen. Og folk som tror at muslimene skal overta Norge og bla, bla, bla. Bare rolls og tull. Det viser bare hvor lite opplyste folk er. Det handler ikke om å ta over et land, så tar du økonomien fra et land, så har du tatt landet. Og det har Frp, og det som er så utrolig med Frp, så har vært liksom fokusert på nei til utlending, innvandring og bla, bla, bla. Men hva faen jo, hva var jo Siv Jensen gjorde? Hun ga finanstilsyn til EU. Og når du gjør kontroll med pengesekken til utlandet, så tar utlandet over landet ditt. Så det er faen ikke muslimene som skal overta. Det viser bare hvor lite opplyste Frp er. Det er sånn populistisk. Folk skal tro det er muslimene som skal overta og ødelegge landet vårt, og så bla, bla, bla. Men det er jo, de gir ifra oss, eller de tar landet ifra oss via økonomien. Det er jo det som er sanninger. Og det er Frp et stjerneeksempel på. De er populister, fordi folk er skeptiske, de klarer dette her med innvandring, det er styggedom, og det er for så vidt riktig også, men det er ikke det som er det verste. Det verste er når du i denne globalismen, når du gir ifra deg finanstilsynet, gir ifra deg makt og strømmen i landet, vi gir ifra seg mer og mer makt, så har utlendingene overtog oss. Det er ikke muslimene som overtog oss. Det er jo bare noen fantasier de holder på, eventyrfortellinger de holder på med. Propaganda, fryktporno, det er det kaller det for. Så du må lære hvordan dette landet her er bygd opp. Det er utrolig viktig. For alt handler om økonomi. Råvarer, økonomi, makt og posisjoner. Og da bruker de media og rundlurer folk, og får folk til å interessere seg for alt mulig. Sannheten er det at vi har vært i en tredje verdenskrig nå som brøt ut på en måte, en spesielle tredje verdenskrig som brøt ut i mars 2020 når denne covid-en kom. Og da har de helt bevisst de kjørte de 2 første årene, da var det mentale utmattelser, altså mentale psykisk utmattelser på hele befolkningen de holdt på med. Så begynte de i 2022, så begynte de med denne økonomiske utmattelsen i tillegg. For da var vi så sletne mentalt, at så begynte jeg med strøm, røverhistorier med strøm og alt det der vindkraft og alt det der faenskap de holdt på med. For jeg skal suge ut enda mer penger. Så jeg kjørte, nå er de over i fase 2, nå kjører de også økonomiske utmattelser av næringslivet, av folk, og alt. For de vet at når de er klart å bryte de ned mentalt først i 2 år, og så klarer de å bryte de ned økonomisk de neste 2 årene, ja, da har du et folk som ligger helt lamslått. Da kan eliten gjøre akkurat som de vil med oss. Da kan de innføre agenda 2030 og digitale penger. Det er jo ikke motstand i folk lenger, for de ble helt utmattet. Det er virkeligheten vi står overfor nå. Og media, de er en del av dette, og det jeg har sett på, det er jo det at noen folk er opptatt av det, og noen er opptatt av det, så ingen samler seg noe, ingen svært få er opptatt av det viktigste, og det er økonomien. For uten økonomien, det er akkurat så en menneskekropp. Hvis du ikke har blod, hvis ikke hjertet slår og pumper blod rundt i kroppen, ja, så dør du. Og sånn er det i et land også. Hvis det ikke er økonomi som fungerer og sender, altså, blodet er en menneskekropp, og pengene må flyte rundt i et land for at det ikke skal stoppe opp. Det er like viktig, men ingen tenker, svært få tenker på dette med økonomien, hvor viktig økonomien er. Når du tok økonomien fra et folk, da er de ferdige. Da kan makthaverne gjøre akkurat som de vil med det etterpå. Men det er svært få som forstår det, for dette er så utspekulert det de har gjort. Og noen snakker om det, og noen snakker om det, og noen går og venter på ditt, og noen venter på Nazara skal få gratis penger, og noen... Ja, jeg kan ikke tro på en dritt av det lenger. For det er bare falske forhåpninger, for folk skal liksom ikke samle seg. Det er en splittehersk, det har de holdt på med nå i over 3 år, har de holdt på med den splittehersk-greiene. Det er en del av dette kyniske spillet. Og folk har veldig lite historiske kunnskap i grunnen. For det at i 1907, da var det en stor finanskrise i New York. Så vi har ikke hørt om, men det var da rett i forkant av første verdenskrig. Så har alle hørt om finanskrise i 1929, de harde 30-årene. Det var en ny finanskrise, og så kom annen verdenskrig da i 39, noen år etterpå. Alle har hørt om finanskrise i 2008, og hvordan de kom over den, det var jo bare med å trykke enda mer penger. Det var å redde og stappe enda mer penger i røven på disse korrupte banksjefene rundt forbi, og skattebetalerne betalt med dette galskapet. Og de trykte opp enormt med penger. Så holdt dette på å gå spindale i 2019 igjen. Da begynte også bankene å miste tilliten. Altså det gikk ikke lenger. Og så var det da de fant ut at nå måtte vi ha en verdensspennende krise. Det var da høsten 2019, og så kom da denne covid-en i 2019. Så egentlig så er det en 3. verdenskrig med nå. Det ser vi holder på med dette med Ukraina, Russland og den skjøvingen og de holder på med. For når økonomien går gale, så ryker folk i hop, og da blir det krig, og så det ikke er noen penger, så kan de bombe og ødelegge, drepe og holde på. Så det er et system i galskapen, men svært få klarer å se hele. Men gå inn og sjekk selv finanskrisen i New York i 1907. Norge hadde vi jo Kristiania-krakket i 1899, og det var tøffe tider da. Og så kom første verdenskrig, og så var det ikke den så lenge, og så kom annen verdenskrig etter noen år etterpå. De harde 30 år kom. Og så har vi alle vet jo om, ja, så det henger sammen dette her, men det er ingen medier som forteller det. Da må du grave det frem selv til å sette ting i sammen, og så finner en ut av det uten problem. Men det er jo svært få som har den interessen der. Men folk som har interessen for det, de ser det veldig lett. De bruker samme oppskrifter på dette her. Så enkelt er det. Dette var planlagt i lange tider.